Mount Vernon. This is a great place to be, and I'm glad to be here. Let's get started. We're going to talk about Mosaic, the modernization of special airworthiness certification, and the word special is the important part here. Cessnas, Pipers, Diamonds, Cirruses, all those guys have standard certificates. Everything out here, almost everything out here, has a special certificate. And special is used for light sport aircraft, but it's also used for experimental aircraft and for warbirds. And they are all included in this. We're not going to talk about warbirds here, but they are included in Mosaic. So this thing goes on for a long time, but our focus is on things with special. I need to give you this disclaimer, and I'm going to read it to you because it's important that you understand this. I've made a genuine effort to ensure that the information on these slides is correct. However, this is a long, tedious, repetitive document that will change. So there may be some errors in what I'm giving you. I've tried to make sure there's not, but if there are, my apologies, and I hope yesterday someone helped me with a correction on something. If you know something I don't know, please speak up. I've read this thing fully twice and studied portions of it multiple times. Believe me, I've just about had enough of it. So, but it will, whatever is in there will absolutely change. Count on it. That's the whole point of you making comments and getting back. We are now, this is appropriate for today, we have 44 days left to comment. That means we are past the halfway point in the comment period. If you have not commented, I haven't either, don't feel bad, but I'm going to give you some suggestions about what you might comment on, but please go comment. Now, when I say that, don't try and comment on the whole thing. There's no way you could do that, not unless you've got a lot of time, and you don't have that. You have 44 days, I don't know how much you could do with that. Pick the parts that are meaningful to you, that affect how you want to fly or the aircraft you want to buy, study those, and I'm going to show you some ways to do that that's a lot easier than just plowing through that big document. When LAMA first approached FAA, we partnered up with the U.S. Ultralight Association and went to them with a short list. They're the things you see up there in white. We had 26 items on the list. We had surveyed industry. We'd done quite a bit of work to find the things that we thought were the most important. And a lot of people gave us advice saying, no way, don't go to them with 26 items. They'll laugh you out of the room. So we narrowed it, and the things you see in white up there, we judged were the most important things that we thought we could get. The weight increase is in a different color because initially we didn't think that FAA would go for a weight increase, honestly. EAA and some others promoted that, and FAA went along with it, and we're going to talk a lot more about that. But when that became an item, we went, sure, we're happy with that, with a weight increase. Because for one, I'll say this a couple of times, most of those airplanes out there on the field right today don't need to change. Some of them could use a weight increase. Many just don't need a weight increase. They're fine airplanes just the way they are. So we don't have to go up in weight just to get the airplanes we want, but we thought that was nonetheless worthwhile for those that did want some more capability. What's not in the rule anymore is drones. The example you see up there in the upper left, the yellow one, that's from the Whisk company, which is now owned by Boeing. The one you see on the right is Airbus. So there's the biggest players in the game going down this air taxi route. Honestly, I think in my lifetime, I'll be surprised if any of these are actually operating anywhere on a regular basis. Not that they can't. The technology is there today to do so, but public acceptance is a big barrier they've got to cross yet, and there's some more regulatory work as evidenced by the fact that they're not even in this Mosaic anymore because they have to have their own program. This is going to take a while. And so that's fine that they pulled that out of there because if they hadn't, we'd be waiting another year or 2 or 3 years for Mosaic yet, so we don't want that. When I analyze this rule, and like I said, I've been through it more than I want to admit almost, I divide the whole thing into 2 categories. There's parts about airplanes and there's parts about people. And they're quite different in how they go about those 2 things, and we're going to explain that. Pilots, yes, of course, that's under people, but also mechanics. And the crowd that does mechanical work on these airplanes is not too happy with some portions of this Mosaic. You're going to hear more about that as well. The guys that we have mainly worked with at FAA have been in the aircraft certification arena. There are many, many agencies. I'll show you a few of them up here, but there are many of them. They all have some input to this thing, or many of them have some input to this thing, but the airplane guys have been particularly innovative, we think. They've kind of had to be that way because ASTM is the system. ASTM stands, what used to stand for American Standards for Testing of Materials It doesn't stay that anymore because it's very global now, so they went to ASTM International. But they make rules up for all kinds of things, amusement rides, and here's an important one. All aviation fuel everywhere in the world meets an ASTM standard, and in no country does it meet a government standard. Aviation fuel, pretty important stuff on your airliner, right? That meets an ASTM standard. So is this a good way to do things? Evidently they've already thought so, and they certainly think so now with the almost 20-year experience of sport pilot and light sport aircraft. So these guys, we give them a lot of credit. They've listened. They've had to listen because they had to give information to ASTM, or ASTM couldn't do its work if they didn't know what was coming. You can't write standards all at the last minute. So they've had to share some information, which I have gladly leaked out whenever I could. One time I got slapped real hard for that, but you know what? You got to get out there sometimes and get slapped in order to do the right thing. So I went ahead and told people what I thought was going on. But these guys have been very innovative. The rest of FAA, a little bit of that same old thing. Some things don't change. One of them I'm going to rant about is medical. FAA also lacks, even the aircraft guys, lack some sector expertise. Powered parachutes like you see on the left, weight shift on the right, or motor gliders in the middle. There's not much knowledge inside FAA about any of those. There are surely some people who know a thing or two about that, but not very many. Kind of like Part 103, if any of you are Part 103 enthusiasts. If you talk to an FAA person about Part 103, it's almost guaranteed you know more than any FAA person you run into. For sure I do. I mean, I can practically quote the thing verbatim because it's the front and back of a single piece of paper as opposed to, let's say, 318 pages. Much less one of those things Congress gives out once in a while that are 5,000 pages. I mean, who reads that? Come on. So let's get into the meat of it here. This is what I call the Christmas in July slide. This is all the goodies that they gave us. FAA told us repeatedly, oh, you're going to like what's in this rule. This is what they were talking about right here. I'll touch on each one of these, but we're going to kind of go through some of them in a little bit. But weight is one of the things that people were very intrigued about, so EAA was right to have promoted weight as an increased thing that people were interested in. But there is no weight limit. There's a speed that sets the weight, and that's a 54-knot clean stall, sometimes called VS1. It is not VS0 or flaps out or lift devices out. It's got to be clean, and 54 knots is it's actually quite an elegant solution to the weight idea. In one number, or two numbers, you can defend what you're flying, and they can evaluate what you're flying to see if it actually meets this regulation. They had complicated methods before, power index and some other things, and that along with light personal aircraft, remember that? All those things got tossed out. So FAA has been through a lot of changes on this document before they released to us what they released. It's pretty good now. A lot of it's pretty good, but there's many inconsistencies, and it was clearly a document that got out ahead of schedule. It got out of what they promoted last year at AirVenture. They said, August of 23, we will have that rule out. They had it out in July. Whew. FAA ahead of schedule, what do you know? But when you read the document very carefully, you can tell it was rushed to market. There's a few typos in there. There's a lot of repetition. Each section that was written by a different agency or different part of the agency, you know, said the same kinds of things over again. Yeah, we're gender neutral and all that stuff. It's said over and over in there, like that's a critical thing. You think you could have said it once. This applies to the whole document, but no, it's repeated all throughout. So 4 seats, retractable gear, adjustable props, 250 knot maximum speed. No one expected that. Why did they pick that number? Well, because that's a speed limit below 10,000 feet across the United States. So why shouldn't we be allowed to do that as well as everybody else? If they're going to give us retractable gear and adjustable props, I don't know that anybody's going to get to 250 knots, but some are getting closer to it. And why not? Fully built gyros, that was one that we thought was very important and was all these years still not legal today, so that's been a great oversight on the FAA's part. When the rule first came out, they specified reciprocating engines only. The current rule that we're living under today specifies reciprocating only. They did that because they didn't want turbine. As you see, turbine's on the list now. When they said reciprocating only, they knocked out electric. They didn't mean to knock out electric. Nobody really knew much about electric 20 years ago, electric in airplanes anyway. So they were trying to not have turbines, and they knocked out electric. Well, now they're fixing that. Not only will we have electric propulsion capabilities, and multiple engines or motors as capabilities. But they're going to also, they threw in hybrid too. They gave us things we didn't even ask for. Helicopters, not little Part 103 helicopters that have been legal for some time, but more regular helicopters that meet the rest of the performance criteria. And the last one we thought was a real important one to LAMA, which is aerial work. Now you may not be concerned about that as an individual with an airplane, or you may, depends. But a manufacturer who can sell a few airplanes that are used in a work environment is going to be a healthier manufacturer. More sales, maybe a higher end product that they could sell to somebody because it's used in a work environment. If that means they can supply the parts better for the airplane that you own, that's a good thing. You may not want aerial work in your airplane, and that's fine, you don't have to do that. But if you do want that and your manufacturer is supplying that, that's good, but also that just makes that business a healthier business. So that's a good thing. We shift now a little bit to the sport pilot side. I said it's airplanes and pilots, or airplanes and people. So we've had the magic of endorsements, I've called it, because they have worked very, very well for light sport aircraft all throughout this whole time. We've been able to get airspace entry, for example. If you go out and get a sport pilot certificate and you've never had any other license and no other experience, you cannot fly into Class B airspace. You probably shouldn't anyway, and why would you want to? But for those that do want to, you can go work with an instructor, get endorsed, and fly into Class B airspace. Well, now they're going to open that door to retractable, to adjustable props. We think they might do it for IFR. That's in question yet, and I'll explain why later. And night is another one of those things that we're going to investigate some more. So let's keep going on here. I told you I was going to say who in FAA does what. You see 4 agencies there highlighted in yellow. Aircraft certification is the guys that we've talked about a lot. We've had a lot of interaction with them. With all the other ones, flight standards, maintenance, and legal, we've had much less interaction, and I would say it shows in the document. The airplane side is pretty much like we expected. The rest of it, some of it came out of the blue at us because we had meetings with them initially, and then we started having trouble getting meetings with them. They were never available or what happened, whatever. And why that was so, I can't explain that, but it shows that they weren't listening as much to us as the aircraft cert guys were. I have personally assigned the medical requirement to legal. I don't have that on any official basis, but it seems to me that that's the holdup. It was definitely the holdup for sport pilot and light sport aircraft. Those of you with long memories might recall that EAA kept saying, this year they're going to release it at AirVenture. That went on for 3 years before they released it. And the reason I was told that it got held up was because FAA couldn't get comfortable with the driver's license medical until somebody higher up just said, we're doing it. And so it went. So we're going to talk more about all of those kinds of things. I like to talk about the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law. The cute little airplane on the left is kind of what we all might have imagined that we were going to be getting out of this. Some fun little airplane that would let us do what we wanted to do and we can go have fun in the sky. That's the idea. What we got looks a little more like the one on the right, which is not to put down that aircraft at all, but just to show you that there's a lot of detail associated with that. It's not just a happy thing. But if you get busted for something, the spirit of the law doesn't matter. The letter of the law is what you're going to be held to. So we have to look at the letters of the law, hence all these words on the screen that you're going to see. For example, this one. This is like a presenter's nightmare screen. But we're studying words, so we've got to look at words. So I'm just going to read them to you because you may not all be able to see those. There's too many words. You may act as a pilot. This is about night, by the way. You may act as a pilot in command with a sport pilot certificate during night operations if. There's usually an if with these things, and often there's an and as well. You receive training. Well, this is reasonable. 3 hours of training, some cross-country flights, some takeoffs and landings. Those are reasonable expectations. But then you must also hold a medical certificate. Well, if you're holding a medical certificate, why are you exercising the privileges of a sport pilot? It doesn't make any sense. So why even say that in a sense? Or though, if you're using a valid driver's license, well, then you have to meet section 6123C3. And when you go look that up, it says a bunch of things. But the one thing that it says in there that I picked out is that you must have held an aviation medical after July 14, 2006. Somebody yesterday clued me in on why that date, and that was the date that Basic Med was released. So, okay, so that's the date. So does the relevancy of a medical you got 17 years ago have any value today? I mean, come on. You can walk out of the doctor's office when you got your aviation medical and have a heart attack right on his doorstep. There's no guarantee with this. And certainly 17 years later, I don't know why they even bothered to put that in there. I think that's absurd. So one of my comments is going to be, forget that, just go with the driver's license medical. We already have evidence that it's worked well. I'll come back to that a little more. There's 3 charts here that you're going to see now, and these are the ones that, if you want to take a picture of them, great. They might show up well, but you can find all these on my website where you can enlarge them and print them or whatever you want to do. Phil organized this, and then I took it and removed as many possible words as I could without changing the meaning to try and make it more readable on a screen for you. But basically, we've already kind of talked about these in a little bit, but so all the slides are the same way. There's a feature, the thing we're talking about. There's what's proposed and what's currently the situation under Sport Pilot Light Sport Aircraft Regulation. Number of seats going up to 4. Currently, we're only 2. Stall speed goes up 20% from 45 to 54. Weight, we talked about. We know what there's hard numbers today. There is no number for weight. I mean, if you could stall at 54 knots, you could have a 5,000 pound airplane theoretically. I don't know that you could ever find such a contraption, but it's conceivable. Have to be mighty big wings on it, and then I don't know how the rest of it would work. But maximum speed jumped way up, more than double. We talked about that. Engines, we were restricted to a single reciprocating engine all up until now. Suddenly we're going to have not only multiple motors or engines, but they can be distributed around the wings or however you want. You just have to be able to prove the case. Adjustable props, they're only ground adjustable now. We're going to get in-flight adjustable, retractable gear. That's only been on seaplanes with amphibious gear. Now we'll get that as well. Those will both be, you can earn those privileges by endorsement, we believe. And then there's an interesting one down there called Mandatory Safety Bulletin, which the presence of the word mandatory means you have to do it. So currently, the manufacturer is the one that issues a mandatory safety bulletin. You have to do it. FAA is not real comfortable with that apparently, and they want to now make that recommended. So how does the word recommended go with mandatory? They don't. This is one of those inconsistencies in the document. And again, I think shows that it was rushed to market a little bit. Time before overhaul, we're going to touch on that one too, because currently overhaul is required to maintain continued operational safety. That's an ASTM, or it's an FAA requirement that ASTM achieves. And there's some rules about that, and it's worked however well it's worked. But they're not proposing to change that, and that's the problem, we'll see. We'll talk about that in just a minute. So everything you see here that I'm going to follow up on, there's a slide about it later. So if I say I'm going to talk about it later, that's because I know it's coming. So this just continues that same slide. I couldn't get it all on one screen, so I had to divide that chart up into 2. But you see again, they are now going to allow some simulator training. They never did that before. Of course, that's a good idea. Simulators weren't that much of a thing 20 years ago. They are now, so I'm glad they embraced that. Number of passengers, you notice the seats went up, the number of passengers did not. Still only 1 passenger. Again, this is with a sport pilot certificate. If you have a private pilot certificate and a medical, and you want to fly a 4-seat Mosaic airplane, I'm calling them, Mosaic LSA, you can do that then with 4 people in it. But that's because you've got the full credential that they're looking for. I'm just going to kind of skip down because we've talked about a little bit of that, but I mentioned night again, and we're going to talk about that some more, so I'm not going to continue on that one. I want to get to this next one now. The medical, we just mentioned, I'll talk about that. Currently, there's no night allowed. They will be allowing it. That's good, but there's those constraints I mentioned. Multi-engine isn't allowed today, will be allowed, but there's no definition about what you do to achieve that. How do you get your multi-engine MLSA rating? Or is there a rating? Or do they do it by endorsements? Nothing of that is specified, so clearly we've got some work to do in that area if they're going to give us that privilege. Flight into controlled airspace, same as it's been for now. Upgrade path to private pilot certificate. It basically doesn't change. You just have to meet the experience requirements and take a test. And currently it's the same thing. High performance endorsement for these higher aircraft, these higher speeds, a 250 knot aircraft. If somebody comes out with one, do you have to do anything about that? It's not addressed in the proposal. So maybe nothing. But given how they've done some of the rest of it, I'm thinking nothing was not the answer they had in mind. And the bottom one there is a comment about you can go from airplane single engine land to rotorcraft or reverse. Currently, and I mentioned this one because it's a methodological thing. Currently, if you want to do that thing, go from rotorcraft or back and forth, you go get with one instructor, you learn how to do what you're supposed to do. You go to another instructor who gives you an evaluation, and you're done. Now they want to make that a practical test and a flight test. So that's an extra burden on those that want to do that kind of thing. They're not that comfortable with rotary aircraft, which is one reason why fully built gyros never got approved. So now we take another case in point. I don't know if you know this name of this man here, Mike Bush. He's been a writer for a long time, quite a good writer, knows engines very, very well, far better than I know them. And what we're talking about here is the current rule. And the reason why I'm talking about the current rule and talk about Mosaic is because you see some of their intent in some of the problems that lie underneath it. So Mike Bush wrote an excellent letter to FAA. I wish I could write one as well as he wrote that one. And these are some direct quotes out of it. He says, this is the current rule we have today, is a massive contradictions relative to TBO and so forth. FAA legal department, which weighs in on these kinds of things, has issued 2 opposing opinions. One says you do have to do mandatory overhaul. One says you don't. They're both from FAA legal. They're both official responses, and they say the opposite thing. Well, so which is it? Mike had a contact inside the FAA legal department, not just inside FAA, but inside the legal department. And finally, he sent him a response, said, he tried and tried and tried. He says, nothing I can do for you. So that situation remains today, that it's, well, can you or can't you? It's not known. And it got issued by the last voice on this matter, so we're stuck. We don't know the answer to that. But what we have today is a situation where a Part 23 aircraft with a Continental or Lycoming or whatever it's got on the front of it, or the back of it, can meet a thing called on condition, meaning if the aircraft and the engine inspects all right, you do not have to do a mandatory overhaul at a certain time. The reason why this has come up now is we are now at about many of the Rotax engines and other engines that we've had in the space have gotten to the 15-year point. In 15 years, you got to do an overhaul. And that's not something that Rotax imposes on anybody. Continental and Lycoming have very similar programs about how to maintain airplanes and doing the overhaul on them. This is not pointing any fingers at Rotax, and not just because Willie's sitting right here in front of me, but you know I'm telling the truth on this part here, and that is that, well, you have to do it. So your engine's got 250 hours on it, but it's 15 years. It's running like a top. Any mechanic would tell you it's running fine. They might do an inspection on it or something like that, going, I don't see any problems. Mike Bush has said that one of the worst things you can do is overhaul a perfectly well-running engine. Something will be bad afterward because humans make mistakes or parts don't fit quite the same or whatever. There's a variety of things, and it's all out of my main expertise, but I see the point. And the whole reason for this slide is to say there's inconsistencies in these things. Just because FAA issues a document like this doesn't mean it's perfect. It absolutely is not. So now we're going to have a little more fun. That was a lot of kind of rules and stuff. Now we're going to talk about airplanes you might fly. Legacy airplanes? Yes. Cessna 150? No problem. 172? No problem with a sport pilot certificate. 182s as well. Some Pipers, not all Pipers. Some of them have too high a stall. Diamond DA-20? No problem. Champ Citabria? No problem. Piper Archer 3 qualifies. I just checked it when I looked for these. 52 knots. Super Veloce from Italy, that thing goes super fast. These are all Mosaic airplanes. Those are the Sling low wings. Bristol high wing 4-seater. Go Get Air, you can see it out here on the field, a 4-seater, handsome airplane. Sling's high wing 4-seater. And JMB's Super Speedster. Those are all going to be Mosaic airplanes, and there's plenty more of them. Unfortunately, that's where the fun ends. Now we go back to work again. Here's this document, and I'm going to leave this thing up here for a little while because this is another one of those nightmare screens. By no means are you expected to read the words on those pages. I'm just highlighting for you here in a few places that when you go download this document that I'll tell you how to go download, and believe me, if you want to study this thing, you want this document. It will make your life much better for these reasons. When you do this on a computer or device, and you grab this document, most computers will allow you anyway today to make a table of contents. So that will produce this thing right here. But then when you see, right, you probably can't read it, but that says the proposed amendment. So when you click on that, it'll show you these kinds of things. I happen to scroll down and get to the one that has night in it. You probably can't read that, but it says night in there. And these little arrows up here show you how you can go back to where you were, which is one of the problems when you're studying this thing. They say refer to that. Well, you go to refer to that, well then where were you? You know, and you finally end up with this thing with little post-it notes all over it or something so you can keep track of where you are. This will make your life much better. You'll see in places where there is magenta text, and then there's some stuff that looks like an FAA reg. That's because that's what they're proposing to do. Anything under red text is what's proposed, as opposed to what's in highlighted text, which is what it is today. So this is trying to say, if you're trying to figure out, well, what are they changing here? This will make this a lot easier on you. And then Roy Beiswinger, who helped create this whole document, the study guide, manually built in some back buttons so that when you get all the way down here and you look at this thing and you get over here, and that's what this one refers to as that one, you can get back to that one. Otherwise, you will get lost in this document. I've had 3 screens in front of me, all with a different thing on them, and back and forth and back. It'll give you a headache in no time, believe me. If you want to study this thing, and I hope you will, at least for the parts you want to see, go download this. Here's how you do it. Go to my website, bydanjohnson.com, go to the search bar on the top of the page, type in study guide, fastest way you can get there. That'll produce this article, which has information I just gave you about how to use the study guide, written out for you so you don't have to remember it. And there are links in there, like the one shown. That's the one shown for where you go find out what people have already said. There's another one for your own comments. I'll show you what those look like. Here's where you go down the lower left. If you typed in the numbers, that would get you to that page, which would lead to this page. And this is the comment page right here. This is where you put your stuff in. It's pretty straightforward. It's not intimidating. You just type in your information. If you want to attach documents or anything, you can do that. And then when you get all done with it, or if you want to look at it beforehand, you can go using one of those other links on that website I told you about. You can go see what other people have commented. Now this says 57 days, we're down to 44 now, so these numbers have changed. But when I last checked this a couple of days ago, there was only 300 and some comments. I'm a little surprised. I have more comments about this rule on my website than FAA has on theirs. So clearly, we need to get busy and fill these guys up with more comments. But if you want to go read what this goes down and down and down and down and down. You can go read what everybody has to say, and if you go, well, okay, that guy said what I want to say, fine, but don't copy his words. Make up your own words. If you don't want to read all that, so I don't know if you know what the phrase TLDR is, but if you're in the social media, you know that. It means too long, didn't read, which I would say pretty much applies to Mosaic. So if you don't want to read all this stuff, and I don't blame you if you didn't, Roy Beiswinger is now up to, I think, 8 or 9 videos that he's made where he's walking you through the whole thing. You don't have to read anything. You can just listen. And if that's what works for you, go to YouTube, type in @EasyFlight in the search bar on YouTube, and you can see all of his videos. So now let's talk about some areas of concern in Mosaic. Medical, stall speed, endorsement, noise, equal treatment, IFR, maintenance, and TBOs. We're going to talk about each one of those separately. Medical is the first one on the list. We have 3 ways you can get a medical for an airplane now. There's the regular aviation medical with a medical examiner. There's basic med, which was an improvement. And there's driver's license, which I think is by far the best. And I'll say again my statement earlier that I would challenge anybody anywhere at FAA or anywhere in government to show me any useful statistics that say that the holding a medical means the flight is safer. I don't think you can prove that anywhere. Sure, people have had heart attacks while flying airplanes and crashed, and those are tragic circumstances, but that individual might have had a medical. That doesn't prove anything all by itself that there was a medical in an airplane. What FAA says, if you have this medical, one of these kinds of medicals, then the flight can proceed safely. Well, that's nonsense. There's some help to that, of course. If you have a driver's license, well, you can't be blind, for example, and get a driver's license. So there are clearly constraints in that too. And if you can drive a 30,000-pound motorhome down the road at 80 miles an hour on a driver's license, I would guess you could fly one of these airplanes fairly safely. It has come up about the color blindness. And I guess that mainly relates to you getting a red or green light from the control tower when your radio's out. That doesn't happen very often in the modern age, but I suppose that could be a consideration. But it seems to me there's an easier way to solve that than insisting that everybody go through this lengthy exercise of medicals. There's just no compelling evidence about them. So that's one of the things I'm going to say is use the driver's license medical FAA. Another one that's very common that people want to talk about is VS1, that's the abbreviation for a clean stall speed. And 54 knots is the number they chose. I actually think it's quite elegant. By those 2 numbers, they can judge the size of the airplane quite well, or constrain the size of the airplane quite well. There are people that say, yeah, but this airplane has got a 56 knot stall and it's almost the same airplane as the others. Okay, that may be valid, and indeed Brazil, which already has a Mosaic-like rule, they just passed in the last year, I believe, and it's already active, they chose 61 knots. Is 61 right? I don't know. To me, we're starting to get kind of fast at that speed. If you want to land one of these airplanes on a short grass runway, a 61 knot clean stall. Now, of course, you're not going to land in a clean stall situation. You're going to have flaps down, assuming you have them. But 61 knots strikes me as a little fast, so I'm uncertain if I want to lobby for more than 54 knots, but that's up to each one of you. It doesn't matter what I think. I mean, it matters one person what I think, but all of you each matter just as much, and so whatever you feel about it, I hope you'll get ready to comment on that. If the airplane of your dreams stalls a little bit faster, maybe you should suggest that. Endorsements is quite special, I think, and we want to see that expanded further. It's simple. You fly with an instructor, he endorses or she endorses, writes in your logbook, and you're ready. No test. You've proven yourself. Now, that puts all the burden on flight instructors. That's kind of a lot of burden on their shoulders, but that's how the system works today anyway. So flight instructors got some duty in this, and they need to play the game the proper way. Noise is something FAA stuck in there, and FAA, this is a quote, it's a political requirement, it's unavoidable. End of conversation. Oh, okay, well, I guess that's that. So in Europe already, they have a regulation about noise already. It's 55 decibels, and that's at 150 meters at full power. 150 meters is about 500 feet, so an airplane 500 feet up under full power can't make more than 55 decibels. Right now, I'm speaking to you at 60, 65 decibels. So that's pretty quiet. And we know that. I mean, you hear all these airplanes take off, you hear a Stearman take off, you'll look, because you'll hear it. You hear any of these airplanes take off, you almost have to look to see if there's one flying or not. We're already quiet. But no, they want to make us jump through a bunch of hoops. You got to do this, you got to do that, you got to do the other thing, so some political person is satisfied that we're not making too much noise. I think that's absurd, and we should just drop that thing. Aerial work we're very pleased about because, as I mentioned, I think that's important for those that want to, for aircraft manufacturers that want to have another opportunity to sell some airplanes that would help their business stay viable and active. But they completely left out powered parachutes and weight shift, not because they excluded those, but because there's no commercial certificate available for those aircraft. You can't get one, and yet you have to have a commercial certificate to do paid flying. We don't object to the commercial certificate part, but either get these guys a commercial certificate or somehow exempt them from that requirement. Exemptions start to get messy. FAA doesn't like that. They're supposed to be short term, so we think they should just change this thing or fix it somehow. And there are ways they could do that. I'm going to offer some suggestions. When we get into a whole bunch of little weird airplanes like this, these are all the airplanes that I like probably the best, so when I call them weird, that's not a smear at all. I like all these little airplanes. I've flown most of them, and I think that's great, but FAA just doesn't know much about them. If it's not an airplane with 3-axis control and usually the tail in the back and the engine in the front, they know those very, very, very well. All of these, a little fuzzier on that. So inside FAA, there's what I call alternative aircraft, and there's not a lot of knowledge about that. So they're making rules for things they don't know much about. That sounds like another organization I know of, but I won't go too far down that path. There are other ways we think they can handle that. IFR, I'm going to do a show of hands here, so I'm curious about this. I did it yesterday and I've done it before. First, I want to ask you, not about this slide, but about night. How many, by a show of hands, and I'm not recording and I don't care what you say, just show me a show of hands, how many of you would like to fly your light sport aircraft at night? Okay, I would guess that's about half. Yesterday was probably 2/3. I was surprised. I've done that in the past and 3 or 4 hands go up. There's been a lot of talk about night, and yet do you really want to fly at night very often? What most people really want is the opportunity to, you got 1 hour left on a 3-hour flight and it's getting dark, and you shouldn't have to stop and spend the night just because you can't get there. But you need to have some skills for that. You need to have the right equipment on board and lighting and the rest of it. But if you have those things, why shouldn't you be able to fly at night? So I'm glad you want that. Now let's turn that same question to IFR. How many of you would like to fly your light sport aircraft not in IFR solid conditions and certainly not known icing, but punching through a cloud layer, let's say, to get home? Bunch of you. So if you have those skills, you have to have the IFR certificate anyway to do that. And so that doesn't surprise me. So we're glad they added that, but how do you prove that? And how does ASTM deal with that? They've been working on something called IMC Lite idea for years and haven't been able to get to first base with it. It just hasn't worked. So I'm not sure how that's going to get through, but I believe we will have those capabilities. And a modern aircraft with like a Dynon sky view in it that shows you things when you can't even see those things, I mean, that's pretty remarkable. The technology is there if you have the skills to do this safely, as long as you're not getting into the wild stuff, of course. Maintenance is an issue that's come up a lot. Folks at Rainbow Aviation Services, Brian and Carol Carpenter, that have trained more than 6,000 mechanics to one level or another. Many of them are owners who just want to do some minimal maintenance on their aircraft. That's all in some jeopardy because of Mosaic now. They're changing how that's going to work. And then there are things like electric and turbine and powered lift, whatever that is. You got to be able to do maintenance. Somebody's got to come up with maintenance courses for things that we don't even know what they are particularly. So there are some real challenges in this, and I'm going to give you some more information right here about that. What those guys have said about it is they consider these Mosaic changes to be a step backwards, meaning that some loss of privileges is coming out of this. For example, owners who wanted to do that minimal maintenance, take the short course from them, may not be able to do that under this new proposal. Their solution is a fairly simple one. Make the skills into modules that then you can take or not take, like getting endorsed to fly with retractable gear is a different thing than a typical aircraft. They can do that in the mechanical world as well. If you're interested in maintenance and want to know more, I've just told you about everything I know just there. Please go to YouTube, look for Rainbow Aviation Services. They've got videos up there that will show you that. You may have to, if you get there, you may need to use the search bar inside that channel and type in Mosaic, but they'll get there. For those that don't want to do it that way, there's a bunch of all capital letters down here. LSRM, the first part of that, stands for Light Sport Repairman Maintenance. That's the guys that take the 3-week course and can do more maintenance on an aircraft, followed by NPRM. So if you want to just see it on a website, LSRM, NPRM, if that's not confusing enough, it'll get you to a place where they've got some more information. So if you're into maintenance and mechanical work, please go hear from those guys. They're not the only experts, but they really stepped up and said, here's what we think. You may not agree, but go see what they have to say, and it might change your mind one way or another. If you have any interest in assisting the ASTM committee called F-37 that works on light sport aircraft and will work on Mosaic light sport aircraft, please do join them. You do not have to be an engineer or an expert. I wrote personally one of those standards, the one for parachutes. I just went and talked to other engineers and followed the standard procedures for how to write those things, and that one passed successfully. So you can definitely have input to this. And when you join ASTM and they send out a ballot for something that they're trying to pass, you get one vote, and all of FAA with 50,000 employees gets one vote. Your vote counts as much as all of FAA. So that's a very egalitarian system, and if you have skills and knowledge, please come and help. We've got to create some new standards. We need to revise old ones, and they are better than regular certification, we believe, because the improvements happen faster. If there's a mistake, if a bolt needs to be changed on an airplane to make it safe, that can happen in 30 days through the ASTM system. It can take years with FAA, literally. It better reflects what industry wants. We think that's important. We want the stuff we want. And this is all done by volunteers. People like me that paid their own way to go to these meetings. They're mostly done online now, so you don't have any big expense. $75 a year, you're a full member. And they really like individuals. They limit the number, of companies that can be involved. There's got to be an equal number of what they call users. That's an individual basically, versus a company. So they keep a balance between individuals and companies. And then, like I said, FAA or any other organization, EAA or AOPA, they can certainly join, and they have been part of these committees in the past. They get one vote too, just one. So it's a very good thing, and I urge you to do it if you think you've got skills. But please go comment. Here's a few words of advice. Use your own words. They will use machine reading for all comments that come in. And if yours is identical to the next guy's, it's going to count as one. They'll count it, but it's only going to count as one. Use your own words. You don't have to change everything, but make up your own words. If you're really concerned about this, go talk to your political representative, your congressman, or if you can reach your senator and you want to let them know what you think about this, that will have an effect too, you bet. And mainly discuss it with your pilot friends. Talk about it, see what things interest you or don't interest you. I know this is dull, boring stuff, but it affects your ability to fly. So please have a look and try and get those comments in. Here's what I'm going to comment. If you want to know what my points are, here they are. Driver's license, medical, I've been ranting about that for a while. I'll continue. Of course, you don't rant. You make logical arguments to these people. And you can't just say, I don't like that thing. That's not going to, what do they do with that? Okay, you don't like it. So we'll make a note that you didn't like that part. Much better if you can say, why don't you do it this way? And you might tell them the thing that they went, oh, we'd never thought of that. Right. They might not. They might shoot it down and not use your ideas, but they might use them. So you got to suggest something ideally if you know that. Everybody's not going to have that knowledge about everything, but you might know something about one part of it. Comment on that then. By no means, don't try and comment on this whole thing. I'm not going to. I don't think you should either. Nobody should waste that much time on this document, as important as it may be. I want them to expand endorsements, as I told you earlier. I think they ought to use endorsements for everything. It's worked very well. I know it sounds like just throwing it out to the community and, yeah, you guys decide if you're going to be safe or not. Well, it's not that way. I mean, most instructors are not going to let you go without, they got to put their name on the book, and they can lose their privilege if you have problems later and it was found out they didn't do their job. So it's a fairly good program, I think. The noise thing, my suggestion is turn that over to ASTM. They'll figure something out in a couple of weeks, make something that everybody can live with, because we all basically can meet it anyway, but it'll save all that effort that FAA spells out. Noise goes on for pages. The 54 knot stall, as I told you, I'm undecided. That's why there's a question mark. I'm not sure we need to go past 54 knots, but I'm just one person. If you think we should go past that, by all means say so. Equal work, I told you, I think we ought to include the entire span of aircraft. A powered parachute might be the ideal thing. I don't know, if we're looking for a lost child, for example. If they fly slow, you can see everything. It might be the perfect aircraft to find that child. Why restrict them? I don't see why. I haven't heard a good argument for why they won't do that, except that it's extra work. I guess that's one good argument. Finally, the maintenance thing. I mean, first of all, that business about is it legal or isn't it legal? You've got to solve that, FAA. Come on. It's your issuance of an evaluation. Fix that. And the TBO thing will get caught up in that too, I believe. So those are some things. But there's a bigger picture. I talked about weird little airplanes, the ones I personally like a lot. Things like that interest me a lot. This is a German publication. The German FAA equivalent is called LBA. And they're a much smaller organization than FAA. They don't have the staff to do everything FAA does, or the budget. And their solution for these airplanes that they really don't know anything about, so why would they be judging their quality, is to turn it over to an organization called DULV, or they always pronounce it DULF in German. And these guys for more than 20 years have been approving those airplanes, and they've got a great safety record, and it's a good way to do it. It's an organization, I think in Germany they do get some government money. We probably wouldn't get that here, so an organization would have to either raise money or do something to be able to do these things. But it would be a lot better if the community handled some of these things, because FAA just doesn't know what they're talking about some of these things. And I'm not even putting them down when I say that. I don't know a lot about what they do, and I don't need to. They shouldn't have to know everything about what I do. So let us figure that out. That's my solution for some of those problems. Part 103 ultralights comes up. Usually somebody will ask about this. We don't believe this should be changed one letter, not unless you want to go from the front and back of one piece of paper to 318 pages, because that's what it'll be the next time around. Look, noise requirements in there and everything else. We don't want to change that rule at all. As time has passed over the years, there have been quite a few new Part 103s developed that are very interesting, and 3-axis, not just trikes or powered parachutes that make the rule, make the weight. Usually it's a weight problem that prevents people from qualifying. But there's a number of interesting airplanes, and I have maintained, although you may not be aware of it, that there are as many Part 103 aircraft sold every year in America as there are light sport aircraft. And I've had people tell me to my face that I'm full of it when I say that, but I think I can defend it. And the reason why you don't know that, if you don't know that, is because they're off flying someplace you never see them. Well, how is that a problem? They're having a good time flying out in the middle of nowhere. Let them keep doing that. I don't see why that should change one bit, and the aircraft that we have today are actually pretty good, so we're not going to ask for any change from Part 103. I'd like it if you kept following my work on bydanjohnson.com. I try and keep a lot of information up there. That name is going to change this fall to Affordable Aviation because I have sold my website content and brand to Flying Magazine, which is going to run with it, I think, quite well. And I had bought this domain name some years ago and encouraged them to take it and sold it to them as well. So it will become Affordable Aviation because honestly, what's By Dan Johnson about? If you don't already know me, then what's that website about? Why would you go there? Some guy wants to promote himself or something? I mean, that's what it sounds like to me. So, but it's worked for me while I've been in the game. However, when I leave the game, it probably ought to have a name that actually identifies what it is. So it'll become Affordable Aviation. You'll begin seeing it. It won't change. It'll all have all the same content will be there. I'll be writing for months yet. So it's not going to change that way, but the name will change, and I'm just making you aware of it. And this show here is achieving something this year, and next year will become something very special. It will be the longest running sector-specific show in the U.S. Sebring had that honor, and they closed down in 2019 after 15 years, a good run down there. They achieved their goals basically and said, we're going to stop doing that now. Chris has just kept soldiering on right here and has been joined. I see Jana Phillip back there, and she has been a great help to him. But he's got a great team here. Every time I congratulate Chris on this show, he quickly says, no, there's a bunch of people behind me that are making this work. And he's right about that. But there's got to be a captain of the ship, and he's done a darn good job of it. And so I celebrate this organization and have a new benchmark next year. And all those people wearing orange shirts, please go thank them. This show wouldn't happen without them. And I want to thank you for your kind attention today. We will get to questions and answers now. And by the way, I'm going to put this up so you know where to go get that if you want to go grab that information. Yes, sir. And if you can say it simpler with less words and accomplish the same thing, that's always better, but it's very hard to do.